The US government's partial shutdown entered its sixth day, and the standoff in Washington appeared set to escalate. Congressional leaders planned a pivotal Senate vote at 5:30 p.m. Eastern on competing funding measures. One proposal was a clean short-term Republican bill, the other a Democratic counterproposal. But either bill required 60 votes to proceed, and Senate Democrats remained resolute in opposing the Republican version. At the heart of the impasse, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett, now serving as director of the National Economic Council, warned that federal layoffs could follow if negotiations collapse. As the shutdown stretched on, Hassett cautioned that the consequences would ripple across essential programs. He flagged looming risks to troop funding starting October 15th and to social welfare initiatives such as the Women, Infants and Children WIC program, which supports nutrition for low-income families. In the televised segment, he said, if it doesn't, we continue in shutdown mode. They are going to be affected as well. So a shutdown doesn't help anybody, really. Makes sense to fund the government, then negotiate other policy priorities. His warning backed up more pointed earlier remarks. I think that if the president decides that the negotiations are absolutely going nowhere, then there will start to be layoffs. The White House has circulated memos indicating that agency heads should plan reduction in force notices for programs deemed inconsistent with presidential priorities. This shutdown, which began after lawmakers failed to agree by the September 30th deadline, has already impacted thousands of federal workers. Traditionally, furloughed employees are later compensated once funding is restored under the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019, but the Trump administration recently signaled it may not guarantee back pay this time, drawing fierce bipartisan criticism. On the Senate floor, both funding proposals faced near certain failure. The Republican measure, which would fund the government through November 21st, had passed the House but failed earlier in the Senate by a 55-45 margin. Three Senate Democrats, John Fetterman, D. Pennsylvania, Catherine Cortez Masto, D. Nevada, and Angus King, I. Maine, broke with their party and voted in favor of it. Meanwhile, every Senate Republican rejected the Democratic alternative, which would have extended funding only through October 31st and included provisions to preserve expanded Affordable Care Act ACA tax subsidies. Because neither bill reached the 60-vote threshold, the Senate adjourned without resolving the stalemate. Congressional leadership warned that this was among their final chances to act before agencies would begin sending layoff notices. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, sworn into office in January 2023, drew attention for breaking with most Senate Democrats. He elaborated on his stance in an interview. It is always wrong to shut our government down. That is a core responsibility. I am always going to vote against those things, he added, that whether the threat came from Republicans or Democrats, shutdowns represent misplaced danger. When you are willing to threaten it down, I was only Democrat voting against it. Fetterman also stressed that public policy should be changed via electoral contests, not shutdown brinksmanship. If you want to change policies, win elections, that is how democracy works. The exchange shifted to US-China relations and Beijing's recent efforts to woo American investment. Chinese leaders have floated pledges of up to $1 trillion in US investment in exchange for reduced US security restrictions. Asked whether he saw that as benign or coercive, the chairman of the House Select Committee on China, interviewed in the transcript, likened it to a subtle extension of China's Belt and Road model, allowing foreign investment but expecting strategic control in return. He warned, investing in US supply chains under Chinese leverage would empower, not diminish, a geopolitical rival. Instead, he argued, the United States should welcome investment from friendly partners under strict terms, not from adversaries seeking strategic gain. The interviewee also responded sharply to a local controversy in Philadelphia, where an immigrant affairs office raised the Chinese Communist Party flag outside City Hall to mark the party's founding. He said success in the US depends on a government that secures our rights, contrasting it with the Chinese communist model, which he characterized as violating human dignity. He considered such flag-raising ceremonies antithetical to those values and urged their cancellation. Looking ahead to a planned summit between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping during the APEC meeting on October 31st in South Korea, he laid out a wish list. He hoped the two would agree they would not try and take Taiwan by force, that China would halt efforts to destabilize the US via fentanyl precursor exports, and that China's national security laws curtailing overseas Chinese national movements be reversed. All key priorities need to be addressed, he said. Diplomatic observers expect that meeting to be one of the administration's defining foreign policy moments. During their conversation, the topic turned to China's treatment of Uyghurs and broader accusations of forced labor. The US State Department's annual trafficking report designates China as one of 13 nations with a pattern of severe labor violations. The interviewer cited estimates that 3.9 million individuals are subjected to state-enforced forced labor in China, especially in the manufacturing hubs of Xinjiang and Shenzhen. The committee chairman responded that China treats people as instruments of the state, not as rights-bearing citizens. He argued that these abuses are not theoretical. They infiltrate global supply chains, implicating US businesses. He pushed for enforcement of the Uyghur Protection Act to block goods made with forced labor from entering US markets. He also accused Beijing of repurposing such tools to target dissidents abroad, warning that human trafficking and repression would continue so long as they benefit the regime. The shutdown, now entering a second week, threatens to degrade US governance and public confidence. Federal agencies remain partially shuttered, and employees may soon face permanent job losses. The dispute hinges largely on the future of pandemic-era ACA subsidies. Democrats demand they be extended. Republicans say those measures are outdated, prone to fraud, and must be renegotiated, but only after reopening the government. In the White House, Hassett is also emerging as a leading candidate to replace Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. Reports indicate he met with the president several times regarding the position. His alignment with Trump's push for lower interest rates makes him a politically compelling and controversial option. The unfolding conflict encapsulates volatile forces in US politics today. A legislature incapable of finding consensus even for basic funding, a presidency determined to tie policy priorities to the reopening process, and rising fears of collateral damage on the workforce, international posture, and institutional credibility. In the coming hours, all eyes will be on the Senate. Will enough Democrats break ranks to pass a clean extension, or will the shutdown drag on deeper into crisis territory? Meanwhile, at home and abroad, the stakes are mounting.